Hi everyone, and welcome to today's event, Alternatives to Police in SLC, a panel. My name is Carrie Lindsay, and I'm the Interim Director for the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. Today's event is brought to you by the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center with help from our student development programs, Queer Compass and Engaging Whiteness. Westminster's speaker series seeks to examine various social justice issues through the lens of student development. Our objective is to provide you and the campus community an opportunity to develop cultural competence, support classroom discussions, and foster dialogues that build the bridge between curriculum and social engagement, and also between the individual and the community. It is our hope that this series will inspire connections not only between ideas and movements, but also between people who are agents of positive social change, allowing you to answer the questions, why does this matter now? What behaviors can I change in order to create a more inclusive campus? What actions can I take to promote equity? Before we begin, I would like to go over some tech reminders. First, this is a recorded event. Our panelists will be answering both pre-written questions as well as audience questions. To submit a question to our Q&A, you can navigate over to the Q&A icon in the top right of your screen. As they're approved, questions will show up in the Features tab. You can also turn on and off captions on the bottom of the screen by clicking the button labeled CC. I would like also to say we're navigating through some technical difficulties. We do have two panelists with us right now, and we're currently trying to get the third one on. With all of that, I would like to navigate over and welcome our Queer Compass coordinator, Faith Staley, who will be our moderator for today's panel and will introduce our panelists. Faith, you can begin whenever.
Hi, I'm Faith. I use they and she pronouns. And as Carrie said, I'm the Queer Compass coordinator, and I'm very excited to be here with all of you and these amazing speakers that we have on this panel today. So first, we have Daoud Moomin, who uses he, him pronouns, a model, storyteller, and organizer, and a first-gen Somali Muslim American from Salt Lake City, Utah, part of the Westminster College class of 23. As the former Youth Congress Equity and Inclusion Chair and currently the youngest board member at March for Our Lives, he has worked extensively as a local and national intersectional organizer for every crucial issue, from GVP to police violence to storytelling as a means for exploring sex and gender inequality. Daoud, the son of two Somali refugees, was featured as one of Elite Daily's 5 Gen Z activists who are the next wave of Black history, to highlight his motivation to give power back to the most marginalized and oppressed communities. No justice, no peace. Carly Haldeman uses they/them pronouns and is a 6-year-long organizer with Utah Against Police Brutality and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. In 2015, they organized with Revolutionary Students Union and participated in Utah Anti-War Committee actions to protest the deportation of Palestinian activist Resmia Odeh, the war in Syria, Venezuela, and U.S. aggression abroad. In November of last year, they attended a conference in Chicago for the refounding of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, originally founded in the late 60s to free Angela Davis and many others. UAPB became an official affiliate at this historic conference and part of the national and international network of organizations with campaigns to combat political repression and police crimes in our cities. You can find out more about the National Alliance at naarpr.org. And lastly, Deja Gaston uses she, her pronouns and is currently finishing her last semester at the University of Utah. She'll be graduating in the spring of 2021 with 2 degrees in Environmental Sustainability Studies and International Studies Bachelor of Science. She is a local organizer for the Party for Socialism and Liberation of Salt Lake. Her analysis of social and environmental justice focuses on radical frameworks in which revolutionary transformations occur in the social, cultural, political, and economic spheres of society. Do we have Deja on the call yet? Carrie, do you want to ask the first question without Deja, and then we can have her answer it when she gets on here?
Yes, let's do that, Faith.
All right, perfect. So the first question, if each of you would like to take a stab at this one, why do you see a need for police alternatives in Salt Lake City?
I'm sorry, is that question for either of us to answer in the moment, or are you calling on someone specific?
If you want to go first, then Daoud can take it after you.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here and with these co-panelists here. I'm really excited to hear what they have to share with us. I think it's completely widely accepted that we need to figure out an alternative to policing and SLC, especially in Utah. We have the highest rate in the country of disproportionate Black deaths. Nationally, the average is 4 times the rate of police killings of Black people to white people. Here, it is 10 times the rate. That is the highest in the country. In the last decade, only 3 cops were even indicted for any of their crimes, 0 convicted. There's been no convictions in a decade, and far past that. Controlling our cities and controlling what public safety looks like is a democratic necessity. It's a question of self-determination for the populations that live here, the Somalian population, Polynesian, First Nation, Black population, the Chicano population. It's a question of self-determination in response to public safety and how we keep our communities safe. And I hope to go more into that. But you know, it's been proven, widely proven, our communities are more safer with resources, not more funding to cops, not more cops in general.
Yes. Well, first I want to say thank you, Mackenzie. That was such a brilliant first answer. Faith and Carrie for inviting me, and to the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center for putting this on. It's important that we have these conversations about solutions, right? But also to take a step back and recognize the problem. When we think about alternatives to policing in Salt Lake City, we have to understand that policing in itself has not failed to serve the people, but instead has worked flawlessly to uphold those in power, right? The policing was never meant to serve and protect all of us. It was meant to serve and protect a few. When policing began as a way to catch slaves and transformed in a way to incarcerate and incriminate Black men in America, we have to understand that this origin is based on a white supremacist root, right? So when Angela Davis, Audre Lorde talk about things like addressing these things from the root, we have to address that white supremacy, whiteness in itself is one of the root causes of violence here in America. So when we continue to understand, right, not only alternatives to policing, but how are we going to reimagine safety? How are we going to reimagine protection? How are we going to reimagine distribution of resources, but also access to those resources, right? Because like Mackenzie pointed out brilliantly, is that the most safe neighborhoods don't have the most police, right? They have more resources. They have better access to healthcare, education, transportation, right? So these services are almost in place of the police, right? But in socioeconomically disenfranchised communities, which is built up of Black and brown people, we have policing, right? Instead of systems that address these, right? There's a reason why NYPD and LAPD and SLCPD have one of the largest rates of violence in the country, because they are policing the most disenfranchised communities in America. So I want to begin by saying that it is our responsibility to understand that we must abolish the police, right? Because the existence of the police is inherently and intrinsically tied to an investment into violence against Black and brown people in America, right? And the antithesis of that is to divest from the police, defund the police, and then abolish the police in a long-term sustainable model as we learn to reimagine. So that's why we need to understand what are alternatives to policing, because alternatives to policing is the first step, right? Because right now we need to place programs that not take off the burden from the police, but shift responsibility back to the people, right? In terms of domestic violence, in terms of mental health crises, in terms of non-violent situations, how do we as a community respond to one another, right? And then it's our responsibility, instead of thinking of just alternatives, it's thinking of systems that can replace the police, right? Because we have never, in the United States, lived in a world where the police does not exist, right? So for some of us to say abolish the police seems so scary and unfathomable because we almost don't know what the replacement is. So that's why there's a need for alternatives, is because we can begin slowly chipping away at the police's roles and responsibilities and giving it back to us. It's important to understand that it's not to shift who is policing, right? Because that's still policing, right? It's not about who's in badges. It's not about what's the skin color of those in badges, right? But it's about the inherent power dynamics between policing and those whom they claim to serve. And I think that's where we need to begin, is understanding the backstory of this, right? Because when we understand America's foundation, when we understand the beginnings of gender, when we understand the beginnings of race, right? All of these social constructs were set up to not serve anyone, but to protect and defend people's interests, those in power, right? So I think that's where I would begin in terms of why we need alternatives to policing here in Salt Lake City.
Thank you both for those answers. I also just want to make a note that Carly is on Mackenzie's account, just so everybody knows. It is, we had some technical issues, but hopefully, I don't know how to change names on Teams. If anybody knows, you can help us out in the chat. But I also want to let you all know that the Q&A function is open, so if you have any questions for these panelists, please put your questions in there and I will read them out. But another question, just to get us started, is what would an alternative to policing look like for you? And what changes would have to happen in Salt Lake for us to get to that alternative?
Yeah, I just want to follow up and say that was a beautiful, eloquent answer by Dowd. I echo that. The foundation of policing was built on slave catching, and then it was continued through Manifest Destiny with the annexation of Mexico and the Texas Rangers and the Arizona Rangers. And these are systems. This is a paramilitary. This is an occupying force. You know, the U.S. is a prison house of nations, and this is an occupying force in our neighborhood. So, you know, how do we overcome that? How do we disband the police? How do we imagine a world without police? These are such important questions. And I think we would be doing ourselves a huge disservice if we were trapping our SLC and not looking to other countries who've implemented socialist policies and socialism, and other cities who are working hard to, you know, implement those policies in their own cities. Like we said in my bio, I'm part of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. This was a historic organization founded to free Angela Davis and went on to free Frank Chapman, the now current executive director of this organization, who was a political prisoner in the 60s and 70s, and went on to free the Soledad brothers and many others in prison. So we have to think about you know, these tactics by police. They use COINTELPRO, they use MK Ultra to break up all of our movements. And, you know, how are we going to create something sustainable to not only thrive in keeping our communities safe, but also, you know, protect our communities against killer cops and seeing them in jail, because, you know, justice is also seeing them in jail, and racist vigilantes who are still, unfortunately, a part of the society, and the greatest threat to our national security is the white supremacist, is the white terrorist. How do we protect our communities in a sustainable way from, you know, things like racist vigilantes and rape and murder, while also not continuing on the culture, this disease of policing in America? And back even when Obama was president, you know, the National Alliance and members of it created a CPAC. It is called the Civilian Police Accountability Council. Its heart is in Chicago right now. They are fighting and they are getting close to winning that legislation, as well as in Jacksonville and in LA. Just to list off some of the cities that are fighting for this: LA, Seattle, Denver, New York City, Jacksonville, Tampa, Tallahassee, Dallas, Milwaukee, Kenosha. There are chapters, fighting for community control over the police, because whether we want to abolish them, whether we have to have a transitional period where we, are just getting in control and redefining public safety and holding cops accountable, being able to make sure that we see these cops in jail, that, we just don't, we don't abandon these cases that have been ruled justified when they are not justified. And in order to do that, the people have to be in power over that process. They have to be in power. This is part of self-determination for oppressed nations and their communities, to determine their destiny and who is a threat and who is not to them, and what public safety actually looks like. And some of the obstacles in Salt Lake that have been there, that's, part of the question, I think. Part of the obstacles that have been there is we introduced SLCPAC, which is, a carbon copy of CPAC in Chicago and in Jacksonville. And we tried to implement it back, we were campaigning hard for it in 2018, 2019. Well, the state introduced HB 415 to block this legislation, and it made a community-controlled council, municipal council, illegal. So we have to understand the state is always going to retaliate, whether it's COINTELPRO, whether it's in the legislation. But if we just, I totally agree with the need to disband police, but how are we going to prevent the ruling classes that are still in power from hiring their own private paramilitary, from hiring their own private forces? How are we going to trust the politicians in this corrupt capitalist system to create the change and change the fabric in society we need to see? They're just not. They're just not going to do it. And that's why it was so important for these working class Black communities and their struggle to fight for CPAC, because it is for Black communities, it is for Chicano communities, and because unfortunately we don't live in a world where we're going to get rid of police. What Angela Davis says is, we're not going to get rid of them at the strike of midnight. We have to use any means necessary to get rid of them, which means even in the halls of legislation. We still have to learn how to collaborate and pivot our politicians into a position where they can't back down from us, because they will lose their job. And what CPAC would do is take power away from the mayor, would take power away from the DA, would take power away from the police chief in matters of public safety. And that's huge. And it was so threatening. That's why the state made HB 415, because we would have the power to vote in people who would have to run a campaign, who we could put on blast. They have full exposure of who they are. They would be required 2 years of community grassroots organizing to be on this council. And that's what we see the future of community control is: first gaining power over defunding. How are we going to defund? Where's the money going to go? The people need to be in charge of that process, because politicians now will never, ever do it.
Thank you. I'd also like to just introduce really quickly, we got Deja on the call. I'm gonna have Deja answer the question that Daoud and Carly already got a chance to, and then we'll come back so that Daoud and Deja can both answer the second question too. Does that sound all right to presenters, panelists? Okay. So Deja, the first question was, why do you see need for police alternatives in Salt Lake City?
Can you hear me well, or is this working? Okay, perfect. So I wanted to kind of jump back on a couple of points that Carly had already mentioned in covering the first question, but I wanted to explain really quickly before I kind of dive in just this idea with the jail killer cops and kind of clarify that nuance, because I think that's something that's on the pathway to abolition of police that can be kind of confusing for a lot of people. But like kind of when you're met in like this capitalist state of binary choices of either the police get arrested and they go to jail, or they don't and they don't hold accountability, that's like one of the most immediate demands of the people in our communities right now, and like these several anti-racist movements. And so like as a working class, it's so important to understand that like as we are working towards like police abolition, this is something that needs to be met under like these different revolutionary processes that like help like mediate the needs of the people. But to kind of jump back to this question, I did a lot of research on what it looks like specifically in Utah with where our funding goes. And obviously we already know that like a large majority goes to the police department. And for like the 2021 fiscal budget, it's almost $80 million. And I found something kind of interesting that almost kind of goes further into the point of why we don't need the police in Salt Lake. And it's that there was a $3 million budget direction towards a governmental immunity fund that goes further into protecting different government entities, which includes the police, police in conjunction to universities, different political leadership roles. And so those are things that aren't necessary to what we need, which is like increasing funding for housing, educational resources, because that's already been drastically cut since June, from my understanding. And we can already see like those detrimental effects already going into like this COVID crisis within school districts. And so those are obvious places right now within Salt Lake that are immediate needs and demands, including homelessness as well. And so those top three, like for our community, I feel are places that we need to redistribute those funds and help like with de-escalation and intervention. And so there's a couple of really good examples already that we've seen resources here that have been created by a bunch of other folks here in Salt Lake. And they've provided a set of resources that include alternatives with housing, resources for queer and trans community, and as well as everything else under the sun, essentially, that is met towards like poor and oppressed working people. And so I'm trying to pull it up really quick, so hopefully this helps. But yeah, just for example, under housing, there's already, this is like presented as an alternative to the community, like the Crossroads Urban Center and Women in Jeopardy Crisis Shelter, LGBTQ plus related organizations like the Utah Pride Center and Circle, mental health, there's the Intermountain LDS Hospital Behavioral Health Access Center. And these are all just several examples of what we can have access to now to help in regards to the de-escalation and intervention, or just all these other things that don't need the presence of untrained police force. And so hopefully that helped like answer some aspects, but that's just kind of giving a glimpse to these like concrete examples that we do have here in Salt Lake.
Thank you so much, and for getting into those specific local projects that are going on and the challenges, specifically with redistributing the wealth and state funding. Carly got a chance to take this one, but I'd like to also hear from Deja and Daoud about what would an alternative to policing look like for you, and what changes would have to happen in Salt Lake for us to get to that alternative.
Deja, you kick us off, love.
Sorry, say that again.
No, you kick us off.
Okay. So the biggest thing that I would like to say is that in the process of revolutionary transformation, not transportation, and just kind of understanding the current political situation, like people right now, they're agitated. They have like the drive and passion to want to change something further than what is currently in place, which is the capitalistic legal processes that we've already known to like come and understand. And really, my biggest like emphasis on this is that we are struggling right now with like the dynamic of who's in power and who has that power to create the violence and the oppression that we see on these people. And these movements and what we're working towards is to shift that power dynamic into the hands of working class people. And so what I see with the idea of like what the police and their role looks like right now, their role is a special body of force that protects like the property and wealth of these people that we understand as like the ruling class, the wealthy, and in Salt Lake, the politicians, large corporate entities, and basically everything that doesn't provide the help for working class people. And so the idea was shifting this power in the long term under a system outside of that is that we have the control, and that is like bringing intense like community care, bringing those like accessible material resources that would prevent the idea of like the crime that we see, the quote unquote war on drugs, all of these things, these resources to help meet those material needs like food, water, shelter, education, A, B, and C. And so on top of that, for me, the idea of what police look like in that relationship is entirely different from what we understand it now. And there's a lot of really good examples. And one I would say is that has been mentioned a lot. And even one of the unaffiliated parties, Gloria La Riva, mentioned this too as well. But in Cuba, their relationship with the police and the way that they interact with communities are entirely different. Like folks aren't scared when they see like this police force and entity because they're there interacting because that's their neighbor. This is someone who they're talking to, they have closer relationships with, and they're there to protect them, but not to enforce these like capitalist laws and ideology that exist now. And so again, to like reiterate is that when shifting those power dynamics under like the capitalist law and order is that under a new system, those relationships are entirely different, and that they aren't there as a governing body to express the violence and the force. And I will conclude it there.
Yes, thank you, Deja and Carly, for that. I think something for me in terms of what does alternatives to policing look like is we also have to understand that, right, oftentimes police forces are agitators of crime or reactionary to crime, oftentimes never preventative of it, right? Like stopping me when I'm going 10 over, like is not you preventing crime and saving the world, right? So I think it's important to understand, like Deja mentioned, why do they have $80 million and what are they taking money away from? It's important to understand that we need to not only create alternatives to answer to crime, but also understand how do we circumvent and solve for crime. Because oftentimes crime is not one of passion, it's not one of intention, but it's one that we're typically forced to do, right? So when we hear stories of parents robbing pharmacies, and when we hear parents going into drugstores and grocery stores, right? How are we addressing the material needs of these people so that we are not forcing them into crime? We're not forcing them into economically disenfranchised position that forces them into being met with policing, right? And also, right, in the recent case of Lyndon Cameron, the 13-year-old boy that was shot by SLCPD, right? We have to think about there was a way to fix that. There was a way to put money into systems that would have answered for that, right? His mother mentioned that she didn't have the money to do anything but call the police, right? She didn't have the resources to do anything but to call the police. So therefore, Lyndon, who is on the autism spectrum, wasn't able to have his needs met. So I think for me, it's understanding, right, how can we defund and divest, which is one of the first main important goals of abolition, is to take the immediate power from this military force away from the government and back into giving resources into the community. So I think that's the first thing we have to identify is what are the budgetary means that we can start investing in that would actually start lowering the need for the police, right? That would start lowering the rates of crime, because we really have to understand our relationship with crime and punishment as we engage in this conversation of abolition. So that would be the first thing, to understand when we defund and divest, what do we build and invest into? I would say the second thing for me is oftentimes, for me, a lot of my work is about addressing like material conditions, right? Mutual aid projects, community service based, right? So I would say is how are we getting services and projects set up that actually help people in SLC, right? And then how does that circumvent the need for the police department? And I would say the third thing is starting to understand our relationship to policing, because as I mentioned before, the goal isn't just to shift who is doing the policing. The goal is to deconstruct this notion of policing in itself and start understanding as safety as mutually exclusive from policing, right? And protection mutually exclusive from policing. So I would say those are the three main things. And then in terms of specifics, I would say, right, housing projects, employment projects, right? Oftentimes crime is related to being economically disenfranchised. So how are we investing material dollars and monetary value into these communities so that they're not forced into crime, they're not pushed into crime, or they're not pushed into areas that, for example, when we see the police department harassing and berating our houseless communities and unsheltered folks, right? How do we answer for that, right? Is it just keep moving houseless people around different parks, or is it to start answering their need for housing? So I would say in general, those are the three things. Is one, to start understanding what is the budgetary meaning of defunding and divesting, and what are we putting money into. The second thing is to highlight and identify what are the material needs of people to circumvent crime. And I would say the third thing is then how do we start building sustainable projects and systems that can then continuously understand, right? Because we only have so much capacity to circulate our own dollars, right? And our own money in between one another, right? So how do we start getting these bigger projects going? So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much for all of those answers, and I really appreciate the connection that you all are drawing between material needs and crime and policing as a weapon of the capitalist ruling class. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about like the ways that we can create sustainable projects, or even like ideas for what those could be. I mean, Dawood mentioned Lyndon Johnson. And I don't know the exact statistic, but there is a large majority of people who experience police violence are in some sort of mental health crisis. And so I was wondering, like, how do you see like the role of, I know people have been talking a lot about like social workers or other like trained mental health teams, like that sort of thing, in addition to addressing material needs of the people. Was that a concise enough question? I feel like I always ramble when I'm talking about questions. Okay, cool. Carly, do you want to go first? Take that one.
Yeah, I'm so glad you actually brought up this question. I get it a lot because I am a social worker. And there is kind of a tricky question we have to address, and that's personally, going on a job with I would love to, to be the first responder. And I think we are far more successful at de-escalation than the police would ever be. The problem I see is if we would be forced to join the police, who still are militarized, who still have the funding, I think it would compromise that relationship we have with the homeless of trust. I don't want to be there just to watch them shoot somebody, and I'm a witness, but it doesn't matter in the end. The cop gets scot off. I think I think the Brown Berets in Los Angeles, Raphael explains this so eloquently, and so does Benjamin Parado. He's part of Union del Barrio, and they talk about, just like everyone's saying, we have to invest more into our communities. We have to have resources for our community to prevent crime in the first place. But we have to change our principles as a society as a whole. And it's a difficult process in this imperial core of a nation, because the ruling class still has control over all of us. They are still in control of the power vacuums that are left. So if we disband the police, who's going to say that they will replace them with social workers? I don't see the ruling class doing that. I see them creating a detachment of the state, of a paramilitary group that's like a private force that's maybe even far challenging to combat. So it's so important that we materially give people the power back to determine what public safety looks like in their communities. It's not an ideal world. People ask the question like, What if you have a community that's, you know, overwhelmingly backwards and reactionary, and you implement something like CPAC? Will we still see change? And these are totally valid questions, but we need the vehicle. The vehicle is CPAC because it gives the communities powers to decide what public safety looks like, where the funds go when they are defunded. Because if it's still up to the mayor, you know, we're not going to see a lot of change, unfortunately. We have to have, you know, we have to demand democracy back to the people. It's with the little democracy we have to protect it, and we have to, you know, we do need that shift in power, as Deja said, and that would brings up great concerns about, you know, we don't want to just continue on policing, you know, working class against working class, dividing our own ranks when they're policing. But, you know, this is just a step, because we cannot reform this corrupt capitalist society. We cannot reform. We have to overthrow it. We have to completely abolish all of that. What is the vehicle to do that? And how are we going to sustain that? And, you know, we cannot just keep putting our calls into the air, hoping that, you know, these politicians will hear the masses, because we are united in the fact that we are not happy with the police. We think that they are a threat to our communities. What is the vehicle for us to change that in the fabric of our society? And, you know, I encourage everyone to look at CPAC, slcpac.com specifically in Salt Lake. I don't think it's the solution to all these issues in society of homelessness, of crime, but it is a step to, and it is a way to get people in power. It is that vehicle who people can determine, like, you know, maybe people, Chicanos in LA, they talk about how they don't want to leave their community is completely unprotected, because in Mexico they see like autonomous groups who are still armed. You know, we see the Black Panther Party who did armed patrols in their neighborhoods of Berkeley, of San Francisco, of Oakland, and sorry, I'm forgetting the other city. I have it written down. But they did armed patrols, and I just want to really read a quote from Bobby Seale, who first talked about community control in the 60s. He said, "We had declared that the racist police occupied territory. That remains a fact today, especially with the militarized police forces in our communities all across America. During these hardcore late 1960s racist, fascist times, we took a big chance with our lives, patrolling the police. It was a time of rampant, vicious police brutality and the murder of Black people by police that was 10 times worse than even today. The concept of greater control by the people and community of their police department is a constitutional democratic necessity. It is the opposite of the racist, fascist corporate control by city politicians using the police department to control and exploit the people. Too many unarmed people of color are being murdered." You know, so I just think it goes back to this question of self-determination, and the right for these communities to develop those policies of safety and of real crime prevention in their communities, which is allocating more resources. They have to be in control of that, and you know, that's why I support CPAC.
Thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about CPAC in a moment after we hear from Deja, and if she has ideas of projects other than, well, maybe, or in addition to policy changes.
I'm almost most certainly probably in the same boat as Carly. Thinking about it, really, a lot of like trying to implement these like larger scale community funded and community invested projects has to do with that like monetary funding. And so I know that we kind of jump back a lot onto this, but one of the most important things to like have for information for people to understand and kind of visualize in their own heads is just knowing like what it is, like how much funding we have in like specifically Salt Lake City itself, and doing the research and understanding where that funding goes and what it means when we see things like the governmental immunity fund or housing reallocation fund or transfer funds, and like what that does for the Salt Lake community. And so a lot of these ideas that we come from, like Dowd said, we're so limited in our material capacity as like working class people to like continue to provide these things for each other. And that's like something I want to touch on really quick. That's so important to understand, is that when we're like thinking of this like big idea of like the dismantle of this capitalist system, overthrowing, handling, and shifting that power to working people, with mutual aid projects and even like community projects that are started through like other working class people, it can kind of muddle the overall idea of like relying the responsibility to those in power who need to be providing that because they have the millions of dollars to do so. But when they see that we're funding it through our own like community, they're going to ignore it. Kind of like with different mutual aid projects we see with like, oh, providing food to the homeless, providing forms of shelter, or like building these different things that could have been like invested in through like these different political figures. And so that kind of just like defeats the idea or kind of shifts attention away from those people that should be providing it for us. And so that's why I kind of go back onto the budget, because the budget gives it really clear. And I don't know how many people tend to look at what's going on within the budget, but even things that are so important like housing, that I believe was transferred 5 million, but I think I'm almost positive, if I can go back into the budget, is towards economic development, gentrification projects. And so when we don't see the rhetoric like that, we can see it happening in real time, but the files are there, the research is there, and like that information shows that that's been going on because we, or like the folks in power, allocated that funding towards it. And so a lot of it is like understanding that fundamental point and then providing that education and that information to working people, because another huge step, obviously, like a lot of people bring up voting as like, this is what we need to do. There's only so much to that limitation that once you provide this information, you can get agitated in other ways. And that is directly going to these policymakers and showing them that you know the information, here are the facts, because a lot of times, like these policymakers do listen, quote unquote, but not enough people are telling them the same thing. And so to have like that community agitation, like the whole Salt Lake community is mad because this budget is taking funding for something that shouldn't be that important and taking away from people and their material resources. And so just that like foundational educational standpoint where the community needs to know these like hard evidential facts is like where I feel is so important into like these kind of like domino effect steps and like the progression of these like different revolutionary processes.
Definitely. Thank you so much for speaking to the specific need for just like people to pay attention and be aware of where the money is going. And for Carly for giving us a little bit more of a history and like a broader picture of the idea behind SLCPAC or CPAC. In our last 10 minutes, we have one question from the audience, and I'd like to tie it to a bigger, like last final question. The question from the audience from Emily is, I'm very interested in mutual aid. Can you speak more about what it is and point us to more resources that will help us get involved? And I'd just like to add, in our last 10 minutes, how can people get involved in any of the projects you've talked about, or just alternatives to policing in general?
I can take a stab at this. So in terms of mutual aid, I would say Salt Lake City is definitely still building out models for mutual aid and new projects, but I would say there's a lot of work that's being done, not only for like just COVID-19 mutual aid, but also a lot around police abolition and incarceration. So, and also housing. So like, for example, Wasatch Tenants does a lot of good work with helping those who are being either evicted or facing eviction, and in terms of either helping them stay in their housing, find new housing, moving, right? So I would say Wasatch Tenants is a really good one in terms of like housing projects, and they do a lot of community-based meetings about like what does housing in terms of oppression and injustice look like. So definitely reaching out to them. COVID-19 Mutual Aid, I think they do a lot of good work, and they need a lot of support. They come to like every single protest and every single event and rally that we have to not only provide like security, but also to provide water, food, guidance, whatever it may be, help, and also another way I consider this mutual aid. I think another thing is also our moderator Faith is a part of like the street medics, and they do a lot of good work at protests as well, and a lot of cool work at rallies just to make sure that people are protected. But also they're starting to talk about like how do we give people the skills for preventative healthcare, so that they if they don't have access to adequate healthcare, how can they take care of themselves before stacking a large medical bill that they can't afford. I would say also Decarcerate Utah. They do a lot of work with bail funds, also making sure that people are getting the support that they need. But bail funds are expensive, and bail funds, that network obviously is cycles because bail fund money is given back eventually, but it's also really expensive. They said that their first bail fund request was a bill of like $65,000. So, or yes, $6,000 or $65,000. So getting involved with Decarcerate Utah. And I would also say a lot of like organizations like PSL and BLM are doing the mutual aid work of addressing the needs of community members. So I would say really the point of mutual aid is understanding what power do we have to support one another, and but also what power do we have to address the shortcomings of the government that's supposed to quote unquote meet these needs, right? So that's what I would say is definitely reaching out to Wasatch Tenants, Decarcerate Utah, COVID-19 Mutual Aid, also Black Lives Matter Salt Lake City, MMCS Salt Lake City, and then PSL Salt Lake City as well, and a lot of other groups are doing that as well.
And I wrote down all of those, so at the end I'll send out an email, or Carrie will send out an email with all of these resources. Moving on, who would like to take next?
Okay, cool. I really love what Deja said about mutual aid, also what Dawood just explained. Like Wasatch Tenants Union is such an important moment right now where people are getting mass evicted from their homes. At UAPB, we had a bail fund that raised over $90,000, and we used all the funds, all of them, to bail out people, not only from our protests, but continued actions. And we also do a lot of work with the families. That's mainly where our work is. We're close friends, we build relationships. If they need help, we'll fundraise for them. We'll share their GoFundMe and help raise funds. But I do think Deja just brought up this point so eloquently, is that we are alienated as a working class from the full wealth that belongs to the people. And we people are doing important work, counteracting that and providing for the community while the government isn't, especially during this pandemic. However, we cannot distract ourselves from who is holding the pot, who has the means, who is controlling the full resources that belong to the people. And we're never going to be able to provide for people in the way we want to, in the way in our groups we want to, unless we actually seize those means, unless we seize those halls and can allocate those funds, because we are alienated, from those full means. And like with reparations, we can give donations here and there, but we want to give millions and billions of dollars back to Black people, not a small check. So it's a question of long-term and immediate goals, and how we're going to protect each other along the way. Because I think, again, a lot of us on this panel, I think, have revolutionary politics, and I do think we need to overthrow the powers in this country to really give back the full wealth that these communities deserve, and for self-determination of oppressed nations in this country. And I want to just quickly say, please get involved. You know, this is not an exclusive group. This is a totally open democratic group. So Utah Against Police Brutality meets every Mondays. You can message us on any of our social media platforms for the link. We meet 6:30 p.m. every Monday. We have people from all different places who ebb and flow come into our group, who help out. And then we do have ties with National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which has been an amazing leader for us. It's a Black-led revolutionary organization with its home in Chicago that it reaches branches across the country. And they've been working hard. You know, our elders have been working hard since, you know, 60s and 70s to form these campaigns. And I think it's important we keep training new recruits into the movement, you know, so, you know, we don't experience this individual activism where we're all coming up with our own great bubble ideas, but we're throwing down our banner around the same campaign because we want to see it through. We want to sustain ourselves and see that campaign through. Yeah, anyways, get involved, reach out to us anytime.
Thank you. Deja?
Well, I guess a lot of it has been said already, but I just kind of want to go back and emphasize again how large this like involvement of all these different folks here in Salt Lake is, and that no matter what path of like this revolutionary process we're going towards, like we're all unified under like similar goals to get there. And so yeah, just like Dow, just like Carly said, is like join any of these organizations, go help do these mutual aid projects. And like, despite what we said, it's just like the biggest take home message is just to understand like where that long-term goal is and like where you want to be within this system or outside of the system. And so I guess the thing that I want to kind of like emphasize on this end is the political education. I always tell this to a lot of people that I meet who are interested, whether it's in our political party or just like organizing in general, and that like in terms of like decolonizing your mindset and understanding these like other implications within education, then you can like really like grasp that knowledge to like take yourself as an organizer, as an activist to like those next steps once you're like politically agitated and educated, and help other like working class people get to some point. And it doesn't mean that they need to be like well theorized and whatever that they believe in, but it further helps like in that point of agitation to get to these other steps that we need in organizing and creating these like different projects that give material necessities. And so I guess on that note, I can also plug in PSL Salt Lake since I am a member, but I just kind of want to say that like with everything that we've already said, we are a multinational, multi-gendered organization. We have different branches across the state or several states, and we do have like international solidarity from other socialist parties as well. And yeah, it honestly, all of it is just to say again, is just politically educate yourself and get agitated and reach out to any of these groups mentioned, because we're all here like wanting to help working class people as much as we can. And so no matter what step, we are here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'd also love to grab, maybe we can send out some resources if you'll have any like starting places for political education, either Deja, Dawood, or Carly. All right, we are about at the end of our event. I'm going to give it back to Carrie just for some closing remarks. Thank you all so much for being here. This was an honor to have this conversation, and I hope to have many more.
Well, thank you so much to all of our presenters. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you to Faith and Dylan. Thanks to all of you in the audience for watching us. We will be making this recording. We will be posting the recording on our website, westminstercollege.edu, and then we are the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center if you want to search for us that way. If you'd like to get more info on any of this, if you'd like to get connected to any of these things that folks talked about, you can email us at diversity@westminstercollege.edu. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Westminster Diversity for more events just like this one. Also, if you have a suggestion of who to bring in or what you want to see or hear about, let us know. And for the presenters, if you want to post any of your contact info in the Q&A, feel free to do it if you feel comfortable with folks reaching out to you about any of the things that you listed. Otherwise, we can also make that available. If you email us at diversity@westminstercollege.edu, we can do it that way as well. All of that info that I just said, I also put into the Q&A. Perfect. It looks like folks are chiming in with their contact information. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we really enjoyed this conversation with you. Thanks all.